Before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you, and I consecrated you. These are the words of the Lord to the prophet. Before he was formed in his mother's womb, the Lord knew him and had called him. And lest we forget, we get the same teaching in Psalm 71. Before you, yes, before you were formed, I knew you, and I breathed life into you. God is the giver and bringer of life, isn't he? It is God who gives the gift of life. It was God himself who breathed life into Adam and Eve and gave them souls. It is God who at the moment of your conception breathed that same life into you. What the prophet is talking about, what the Psalms are talking about, is that bringing of life and that calling, that consecrating, that setting aside for your vocation. Now, vocation is kind of a fancy church word, isn't it? You don't ever use it anywhere else. But vocation means what it is God has called you to do and to be in the world. Now, here in the United States, we like to talk a lot about what we do. Right? You meet someone at a dinner party. Oh, hello, how do you do? So what do you do for a living? Where do you work? As is somehow knowing that you're a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or a salesman or whatever it is you do is going to tell me something fundamental about who you are and the way you make your way in the world. I mean, it'll tell me what you do for 40 or 50 hours of your time every week. It'll tell me something about who pays you. But it doesn't say very much about who you actually are, does it? Imagine if you went up to someone and said, oh, hello, nice to meet you. How is it that you follow God? Imagine how popular you'd be at all the dinner parties. You're the person always seated at the table for the misfits at the wedding by the restrooms in the back, right? But isn't that a more important question? How is it that you follow God? What's your vocation? How do you live into what God has breathed life into you to do? This is what the prophet is addressing. This is what the psalm is addressing. And yes, this is what St. Paul is addressing in his first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 13. No doubt you've all heard that passage read before, probably at someone's wedding. We like that passage at weddings. Why? Because it's fun. It's nice. It's squishy. Right? I mean, it makes love sound so fun and lovey and ooey gooey and wonderful. But Paul's talking about a very specific kind of love. Paul is talking about the Hebrew concept of chesed. Now, you've all read that word before. You probably just don't recognize it pronounced that way. But do you remember in the Old Testament seeing the word loving-kindness? You get that in the Psalms sometimes even, don't you? That's chesed. It's loving kindness. Paul uses the word agape in the Greek. It's a very special kind of love. It's not like you love your iPhone or you love going to Publix. No one loves going to Publix. But a very special kind of love. The kind of love that looks after the long-term best interest of the other person. The The kind of love that would hope all things, bear all things, endure all things, be patient and kind in all things. That kind of agape love is the kind of love you're meant to have for God so that you can fulfill your vocation in the world. And what is the Christian call and vocation? To love. It is to love God with all your mind, all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And the second one, that's really the first one, Jesus tells you about this, is to love your neighbor as you would love yourself. So you're supposed to love God and love neighbor. I talk about that in terms of your two goals are to, one, become a saint. Because that's loving God. If you love God, then you want to become a saint. You want to become like Jesus. And the second, loving your neighbor, means dragging them to heaven with you. Because they need to know about Jesus, and having loving kindness, having that hesed or that agapo for them, is about loving them enough to share the joy and love you have found in God with them. That is the Christian vocation. So when someone asks you at a dinner party, what do? You can say, well, I love God with all my mind, soul, and strength, and I try to drag other people to heaven with me. And that's what I do. Because that's what you are meant to do as a Christian. The kind of love you are supposed to have for both God and neighbor is to be the kind of love that indeed is patient in all things, even when you would rather not be patient. Because the Lord has been patient with you when you refuse to follow Him. The kind of love you are meant to have, then, is the kind of love that is kind in all things, even when you would rather not be. Because the Lord Himself has been kind to you. For while you were yet a sinner, He died for you. The kind of love you are supposed to have, then, is the kind of love that hopes all things and bears all things and endures all things, because the Lord came and hoped and bore and indeed endured all things for you. So, what is it you do?